So, kind of go back over and take from there on out, correct?
Certainly. So as we left off, that's when we had learned about the issue with the digital recorder. I don't remember if it was my idea or Special Agent Mackey's idea, but we asked him if he'd be willing to allow us to start a second recording and be successful and actually kind of do a summary of what we had spoken about up until that point.
And at some point you asked him why he confessed, and he told you because he wanted to do the right thing.
I believe so, yes.
And so everyone's heard that audio taped interview, so I'm not going to go back through all of that. But you asked him if he had killed the kids on purpose, and he had always maintained, or he maintained, that Natan was an accident, correct?
That is correct. He does maintain during that recording that Natan was an accident.
And he even kind of took that, I don't know what I did with that picture right there. He even kind of took that picture and used it as far as, think of me with Natan like this.
Yes, he used it as a demonstrative aid and said,
and he told you that he had killed the children because of the voices.
Correct.
And you've seen defendants 1 of 3.
I have.
Which these were given to you by Agent Lawrence, correct?
That's correct.
And you utilized these 38 questions and asked him before you recorded everything, and then I think you went back through these after you recorded.
Yes, so that was a tool that was also given to us by the behavioralist with SLED. He had mentioned that on the trip down about this questionnaire. While we were in the interview, at some point over the duration of the interview, he had sent them to Lieutenant Lawrence by email, and Lieutenant Lawrence printed a copy and gave them to us during the interview, and we used them during the interview. It was the first time I had ever seen those questions.
And those were used to document someone's mental state?
It was my explained to me that they had some role in that, yes.
And you went through them twice?
I did, because the first time would have been on the first recording, and then when we started over, it was easy to just ask those questions again.
And he gave the same answers, almost identical both times?
Yeah, I recall the answers being close enough that it wasn't any real discernible differences to document.
And one of those questions were, did he know or it was against the law?
That's correct.
And he said, hey, I wasn't thinking about the law then.
That was part of what he said.
And I think one of your other questions, or one of the other questions was, would you have done it if a law enforcement officer was right there?
That's correct.
And I think your example was, would you have done it if you were arm to arm with an officer?
Correct. I think I actually said elbow to elbow, but it's the same idea, yeah.
And he said, yeah, because I saw myself as a target at that point in time.
And I believe he said that he thought Natan was holding the gun.
Kind of like if Natan was holding a gun on you.
Something like that.
And you asked if he had any unusual mental experiences when he did it. And he said, yeah. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct. I hadn't, since that's recorded, I haven't studied that section in as much detail.
He talked more about the voices in his head.
Correct.
And you had asked him if he had had any hallucinations that night, and he told you no, just voices.
Correct. He just said voices.
Let me show you what's been marked. Defense ID 129. You didn't have her book. Do you recognize that entire? May I see that? Yeah, let me make sure you can ID it first.
Recognize the question portion, which is 1 through 38. 38. I don't really recall the beginning portion or the ending portion here.
Well, you didn't have the beginning or the ending that night, correct?
I don't think I did. I think, in fact, we actually had these printed on this is a PowerPoint, and we actually had it printed 4 slides to a page.
But you
Your Honor, we
received
can
those later.
expedite, objection for just a moment, we can expedite this. What was actually used as an evidence? It's a defense exhibit, I do believe.
It is, and I'm asking if he's aware now of the PowerPoint that goes with it. He received it afterwards.
How's that relevant? I mean, didn't he use that?
He did not use this at that time, but he received the whole thing later.
How's that relevant? It wasn't used then. I mean, saw it on Facebook since then. How's it relevant?
I just believe it's relevant.
I don't see any relevance if you
I mean,
didn't.
it's already in. You wanna put it in
Not
3 or 4
portion of
times?
this, not the PowerPoint that goes along with it. No.
But he didn't use the PowerPoint.
He didn't say he did, but he received
Why is it relevant?
because it explains the questions.
No. Make a record of it later. It's already in.
I've got that in his ID already, Judge, we'll leave it there.
And you asked him about if he had any other crazy beliefs, and I think he mentioned to you that he was a Freemason.
Correct, he did.
That's kind of seem odd when you
I think it's kind of odd that somebody would reference that as a weird belief. I know quite a few people who are pretty avid Freemasons, and I don't know much about Freemasonry, but they're all pretty normal people.
look over there if you want to learn. But
Sounds like it's a lot of work.
and as you said, Agent Lord was a polygrapher. He had his stuff with him, but y'all didn't feel that there was any need to put him on a polygraph to check anything that he had told you.
We didn't, and that would be pretty normal. I think in the almost 10 years I've been doing this, I can only think of one time when we've put a person on a polygraph for a criminal case, and it was actually very recently, and they actually requested it.
Let me jump into the 9th. Tim is still wanting to help find the children, correct?
Correct. He had agreed to us on the night of the 8th that he'd be willing to continue to help us try to find out where the children were.
And y'all talked with him pretty quickly right then, correct?
We did. We were actually in that same room. We had that initial briefing in with all the local law enforcement. It was pretty similar, except Timothy was involved in it, and we were looking at a map and just trying to narrow down our search grid, for lack of better terms. And the Alabama authorities had been notified of what was going on, and they were actively kind of searching this same area, and we were kind of working out a game plan. It appeared that Highway 10 was kind of the direct route that ran between Camden and Greenville, and so with them being with him at point A but not point B, it was easy to presume that if they were somewhere in between, they were probably somewhere around Highway 10.
And you did not record those conversations with him.
We didn't, because it was mostly planning with law enforcement. He was given another advice of his rights, and Special Agent Mackey did have him go over the general events of the 28th, but it wasn't like a full-blown interview. It was all kind of quick, because we wanted to certainly take advantage of the daylight we had available and get on the road if that was going to be our plan.
But he did mention something about Natan breaking some glasses.
He did. He had mentioned that on the night of the 28th, Natan had broken a pair of prescription glasses, and as he's mentioning this, he'd been pretty upbeat and enthusiastic when he told the story about the glasses. You could hear kind of a bit of anger in his voice, and you could tell it was something he was still a bit bitter about.
At some point after talking with him for a little bit, y'all end up heading to Alabama, correct?
We do. So as it's been described by some other witnesses, we had a bit of a convoy going. I was seated in the back seat of a Smith County Sheriff's Department patrol car with Tim. The car was being driven. In the front seat was Robert Garner, who's now the undersheriff with the Smith County Sheriff's Department since Marty Patterson retired, and a Deputy Charles Johnson, who previously testified on the case. And I sat in the back of the car with Tim as we traveled to Highway 10 because he was convinced if we could get him in that vicinity that he'd recognize the location, which he had described as just a very almost generic dirt clay drive with gravel and some elevation details.
but the topography was going up or something. He thought that that's something that could lead him to recognize.
Correct. He had actually drawn us a map during the briefing. And later on, when we actually find the site, the map was actually pretty accurate, and he actually made a pretty particular point to denote elevation differences in the map.
And you had told him while y'all were driving there that he was doing the right thing by cooperating and taking you to the children.
I did, because it was important for me at that point that our big objective was to find those children and bring them home.
And I think at some point in time, y'all thought, or he thought that it was the right place, and it ended up being kind of wrong. Y'all made like wrong turn or went up a wrong drive.
Yeah, we were just around Camden. I don't remember if I think we were just before Camden. He had seen a left-hand turn and said, that might be it. And we turned on it, got a little ways down. It was actually a residential driveway, but it was dirt clay with gravel. I don't know that the rest of the convoy knew it was a residential driveway because they didn't get that far before we turned around and backed out. He was pretty upset about it because he didn't want it to appear that he was just jerking us around and taking us on a wild goose chase. I mean, my thing was, well, it's the first wrong turn we've taken in, 160 or so miles, so I was prepared for more wrong turns than just that.
And I think you put a quote that he told you that I know I'm prosecuting myself here, but I want to do the right thing.
Correct. That's what I've got him attributed as saying, I know I'm prosecuting myself here, but I want to do the right thing.
And he was saying that multiple times.
He did, and I used that as an opportunity to kind of offer non-judgmental assurance because, again, we've been pretty professional with him up until this point. I think it's safe to say a lot of people in that position probably wouldn't have been, but we wanted to maintain that because, again, at that point, his cooperation was still very important until we found those children and potentially afterwards.
Well, and he even expressed to you that he was worried that, hey, once we find the kids, that you're going to kind of become a jerk to him.
He did express that as a current concern, and I told him that wasn't going to be the case. I mean, it's just like if I was to deal with him today, I'd probably treat him no differently than I did that day.
Yeah, you told him, hey, I'm not going to punish you for helping with the investigation.
Correct.
And at some point in time, you found that right driveway, correct?
We did, so I don't think, without looking at a map, and I want to say it was maybe 10 or 15 miles further down. I mean, we were moving at a pretty good pace. But we actually passed it initially because we were going so fast because it's just a stretch of woods that all just looks the same. And it's kind of a blink and you miss, and he just happened to snap his head around and said, we need to turn around, we need to turn around. And I was on the phone with Special Agent Mackey as he testified as this was taking place. And as we start going up this drive, he starts saying, this is it, this is it, this is it. And prior to that, he had told me that once we get to the site, he goes, this is probably going to be very emotional for me. And I mean, I guess I can absolutely see why. And sure enough, as we get further up the drive, he starts crying and sobbing quite heavily.
And you get him out, and he tells you they're over there. And I think your words were he was highly hysterical at that point.
Correct. And initially, we got out the car. It was a pretty intense moment. Initially, I kind of veered left with Sheriff Crumpton, as he described, the odor had kind of wafted into kind of a low-lying hollow area, and I actually veered that way as well because the odor, I mean, we knew we were at the right spot. We had to be. And it wasn't until I kind of got down there and turned around and realized they were kind of walking him up and over to the right, and that's when I turned and saw him start gesturing toward where we'd find the bodies, and it actually was a pretty accurate description as to what he had drawn for us that morning.
And you were told at some point in time, okay, now it's time to take him back to Mississippi. So y'all didn't stay there very long, did you?
Correct. We had been on scene just mere minutes, and it started to get flooded with local Alabama law enforcement personnel. Helicopters were landing. There were probably several dozen people in just a matter of minutes. Sheriff Crumpton didn't want to keep Timothy there any longer than we had to because Timothy was his responsibility at the time, his prisoner, and we can't account for all these Alabama guys, and there's no need to, there was no further purpose for him to be there, so we want to go ahead and get him back. And it was understood that I'd be riding back with him to kind of go over what we found.
And you decided on the way back that you were gonna audio tape a portion of that, correct?
I did. It's, I think a few hours up there, but we were driving pretty fast. Driving back, it was a considerably longer trip because we were going to speed limits. We recorded about a 25-minute or so portion, I think, because a lot of it was just sitting in. I think we were both kind of crashing at that point for a lot of that drive. But we did kind of go over the findings and what we may or may not find and talk about the case more. 25 minutes recorded.
Well, actually, I think you started a recording and it maybe lasted like 25 seconds or something.
Yeah, so that was before the decision had been made to rush him from the scene. We were trying to get him a cigarette because he'd asked for a cigarette. We'd been allowing him to smoke cigarettes the night before, and that day I didn't care. And so we were trying to arrange for him to have a cigarette, but Sheriff Crumpton was more interested in getting him out of that area. And so we had started a recording and then stopped it almost immediately, and then got in the car, and shortly after that we started what would actually technically be the third recording if you count the one that's only a couple minutes.
And you audio taped that 25 minutes.
Did.
Yeah, we would offer 130 into evidence. I don't think that the solicitor has an objection to it.
That's reporting.
It's the recording of his. It's on a thumb drive now.
Any objection, Solicitor?
No.
All right, 130 will be admitted without objection.
It's not the 20. It's not the 25 seconds. It's the wrong one. Yeah. That's not the 25 seconds. At least that's not the no one needs to hear. Not in this format. Yeah.
I have to turn this on or just?
Nothing has changed, Tim. All that has changed at this point is you told us that you told us the truth. You told us where we find the bodies. You helped us find the bodies. Tim, I've got just a couple questions, some things that are going to come up, and I figure it's better for us to talk about them now, but we've got some time together on the way back, okay?
Yes, sir. Crack this window back a little bit.
Yeah, guys, can we crack the windows a little bit?
It's really hot back here. I didn't crack.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
You guys crack the other side of the touch stick.
Yours don't work?
That's all right.
Make it harder to write, I guess.
Tim, first off, you don't have any problems still talking, right? You're aware of your rights?
Yeah.
Do I need to go over again?
No, let's not go over that again. I already know how it works. Is that on? Please make sure it's on. So
Yes, it's on. We all got to do this.
I don't want it to.
Okay.
Let me roll this up. You're not going to be able to hear me. Can you roll that window up? You're not going to be able to hear the recording. I'm sorry, I forgot about
That's
that.
okay. No, that's all right,
I
Tim.
didn't think nothing about that.
Here, I'm going to set it up here.
Hey, that might get...
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
All right, Tim. You told us last night, you made a comment that when we had the bodies, we found the bodies, we were going to have more questions. Do you remember saying that?
You guys, I mean, that was a dead assumption. That was a dead assumption.
Dead assumption?
Well, I hate using that word, but
No,
I think you understand what I mean by that. That was assumed that you were going to start asking more
When we
questions.
open those bags, are we going to find anything that's going to surprise us about the condition?
I hope not. So,
What kind of shape were they in when you put them in those bags, Tim?
I mean, they'd been dead for a while. So what, 3, 4, 5 days? I forget. It's all running together. They've been deceased for a decent little while before I even put them in.
And are we going to find signs that any of the bodies were mutilated?
I hope not.
Hope not.
No, because that wasn't what I was doing. Mine was just put them out, run. like I said, I had those thoughts in my head to do what I was gonna do, but I couldn't.
But you couldn't bring yourself to do it.
myself to do that.
I understand, Tim. What else is going to be in the bags with the children?
Blankets
Blankets,
and more bags.
More bags.
Double and triple bagged.
double and
That's
triple
probably why
bags.
there's no vultures around.
Yeah.
I wasn't intending to do that either. That wasn't, I'm gonna escape that. I was just trying to buy time, that's all. I knew I was gonna get caught.
Is there anything else we haven't covered? I know we've talked a lot, and I know this is really hard to talk about. But you're doing the right thing. You helped us find those children. I told you that's what we came down here for, right? To find those children.
Pick this up and speak it short.
Yes.
For the record, I'm so sorry about what I've done. I hope I get to see my kids again one day. Lord God, forgive me.
Tim, is there anything we haven't covered with you that we need to know at this point that this investigation is going to show about what happened to those kids?
I can't think of anything right now.
So when we open those bags, because there's a little bit of concern, one of the bags was a little ripped open. That could be from animals. It could be from tossing them out.
That was probably me. I was very...
What looks like it's sticking out the bag does not look like it's in good shape. It does not look intact. Is that anything that's going to, when we get further into that bag, is anything going to surprise us?
I hope not. I was merciless when I put them in there and threw them around. So, I mean, this was after the fact.
Yeah.
I put them into the vehicle mercilessly and threw stuff in there to try to shelter the smell. So, I mean, that may be something else you find. I don't know. Like I said, it wasn't exactly my thing to go scope them out when I was doing that. I was
Yeah.
turned a blind eye to do that.
Is there anything else you can think of that you need to tell us, Tim, about what happened, why this happened? I mean, because we're at this point. I told you nothing was going to change when we found the bodies. That we needed to get those children a proper burial.
I don't want to go to the burial. I'm not worthy to go.
Nobody's saying you got to go, but we're just saying the children deserve a proper burial. Yes, and they're going to get that now, aren't they, Tim?
I sure hope so. He did this because it was the right thing to do. No, I knew what it was going to cost me. But I didn't care because I can't keep this shit on my chest and walk around acting normal.
I understand
I can't
that.
do that. I don't know how people could do something like that and not. I couldn't just walk around with myself. I can't be okay with myself. But what I've done. Can you state for the record there that I have told you the truth, though, the best that comes to mind once I got past my fear of...
Tim, I'm going to tell you this. I write very thorough notes. I write very thorough reports. So everything you told me is going to be documented. And your cooperation with us is going to be documented.
But I wanted to come back and kick me in the ass. There's other stuff found, and it wasn't
Yeah.
really...
I understand.
Mine was just to get this done quick. It would explain why I didn't carry anything out. I just wanted to get it done and quick. I was running on time. You borrowed. Yeah, I think those guys. That's what I said. I've got a death warrant on me now.
Not necessarily, but you know people can be sensitive when crimes like this gets reported.
Without understanding, yeah, if somebody who got, an eyesight like you, they're not going to understand. They're going to see me as, they're just going to see the outside. They're not going to see the whole depth of what happened. So I said I'll probably go in there and somebody might cut me off. I don't expect to come out of jail alive.
Is there anything else you want to make sure makes it in the record at this point?
I love you kids. I'm sorry about what I did.
So you say you love your children?
I hope I can see them again one day. I'm sorry. If you could take me back, I would do everything I could to do back then.
Tim, I've got to catch up on some notes. I'm just going to, it's no harm. I'm just going to leave the recorder going. If you feel like there's something you want to make sure makes it on the record, you just feel free to speak it. And I want you to tell you that you did the right thing.
Please contact my mother.
I'm gonna work on that. I wrote her information down. It's probably gonna take some digging. It's probably not something I can get to this week.
Don't you mind, please, John?
But I am gonna look into that one, okay?
It's rattling my cage and I can't keep straight in. I'm gonna say cry all night again. No, I'm not on suicide watch either. I promise you I'm not going that route. What town was that in?
Guys, you know what town we're in? Cox County. Wilcox.
So was it right? Was it on that little arch on the map?
We'll have to go back to the map.
I think that might have been it.
It might have been.
Like I said, I can't live with myself being that way. Bad moment, man. Bad moment. I lost my mind. So sad. My life.
Tim, the important thing is we know they're not suffering now.
No, if anything, that they're with Nick. Promise I want to be with them. They're with me. That's the problem. Why am I suffering? If anything, that they're in paradise right now. No? I think they're in paradise. I hope I get to see them again one day. I really do. Please call my father and let him know I've told you guys where the bodies are and you found them.
I will, but I'm gonna call him when we get back, okay? 'Cause at this point, there's no telling how many phone calls I'm gonna have to deal with between now and us getting back. Now we're having to play, logistical tag, and
Tremendous.
Dave and Dave are gonna take care of things back there at the scene for me, and hopefully no issues there. So, got a lot of agencies out there, and a lot of people want to help, and so we're kind of having to, we're kind of having to turn people away because, we know who the children are. There's really not going to be much to do out there. So we're going to take them back to South Carolina, and we'll do autopsies in South Carolina. But you're telling us the autopsies aren't going to show us anything surprising.
I hope not.
Hope not.
I was merciless when I threw them in. I wasn't exactly nice about it. I wanted to get out of there.
When you killed the children, Tim, did you do? You're saying you just strangled 4 children. I know about the time. You said several times very detailed story about what happened.
Then after he was gone, then I just proceeded.
The 4 children that you strangled, did you do anything other than strangle them? How quick was it?
I mean, it wasn't quick. Well, what do you mean how quick was it? Like from the beginning to the end? How long did the whole thing
Do you
take?
think the children suffered?
I tried to make as little suffering as possible.
Did the children all know what was happening?
I'm not sure what was going through their minds at that point. I don't know what they had a clue was going on. All I know is that I lost it and then started acting the wrong way. Just carrying on with the wrong activity in my head.
And you had the children all week. Did you make any efforts during the week to do anything to dispose of the bodies?
No, I just sat around, just been in a daze, like, what? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I was like,
but you had them in the car all week too. When you were driving around South Carolina. Remember we talked about that?
I think they'd stay in the car, and I was in the house for a couple days.
Yeah, those first couple days.
And then I started just aimlessly driving. It's like, well, I'm gonna head out to Vegas. I'll drop these off, and I'm just gonna buy time. And I was planning on.
Is there a reason it took you 5 days to get to that point though?
No, it's just. I can't give a reason. I was just kind of blah, like I lost my mind, and things didn't matter to me like they used to as far as time was He was just the one I went to because he was the focal point.
Focal point.
Yeah, I mean, he was the whole focal point for this whole thing.
So you think even after? Do you think even after you killed him, you still think he was kind of the focal point of all this?
Yes.
That's why I called him when he said 45.
I mean, there was other parts to it, but he's the focal point. I mean, it's centered around him.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about it.
No.
That's interesting. I want to hear about
the
it.
outlet that leads me to believe what he was doing was he was premeditating something toward me.
Is it just the outlet situation that makes you think that, or is there more to this? I know the outlet, and you also hold against the time, the DSS.
So I'm not holding against him. I'm just telling what actually happened.
Yeah.
And he admitted to the worker, him and Mira wanted to go see their mom. And they wanted to go live, and she told him no.
Yeah.
She says, if you're going to cause trouble for him like that, you're not coming by me, is what she told them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of what happened.
Tim, at any point, do you think we've treated you unfairly throughout this investigation? I'd like to think that we've helped you a little bit to come to terms with some of what you did.
I'd say so. I mean, what you guys have done, this is my fault. So I really can't say it's you guys. I mean, I did this. No whim of bad choice. Then my mind went off on a tangent. I started acting in the wrong voices, man. And then I made more bad choices.
You'll see me again before we head back to South Carolina probably tomorrow, but when you get back into South Carolina, I'll definitely come see you again. That may be soon. I don't know what time frame they're working out with that. My understanding is they talked to you about the voluntary extradition already. Is that something you're okay with?
I ain't waiting no 6 months. Let's get this done now.
Yeah.
I would say take me back tonight, but they don't have it set up.
I mean, you'll probably get to a nicer jail once you get up there with us. It'll probably be a lot more comfortable for you.
I don't deserve comfort, do I?
I'll keep close tabs on what we do with the extradition. Here's the thing, even though you've not invoked any rights to an attorney, before you sign any voluntary extradition, they would like you to at least sit down with a local public defender to explain the paperwork to you and make sure you're fully aware of it. And then if you still want to go through with it, then we'll get that paperwork started and we'll make arrangements sometimes here in the future. Because right now we don't have any warrants yet. Not based on what we've talked about. There probably will be some, but they're not in place yet. What's got to happen? Somebody's got to type them up. They've got to take them to a judge. They've got to get them signed. I don't know if that's going to happen today, tomorrow, a couple days. I would expect it's going to be something that's probably going to happen pretty soon.
So basically, with all these little kids, you're saying I'm going to pretty much have a target on my back.
Not necessarily. I mean,
Watch your back.
You got to think you're not the only person that's ever done something like this.
I shouldn't feel like it, man.
So, I mean, and you feel that way because you're remorseful. You feel bad about what you did. You know it was wrong, and you know you shouldn't have done it. And you can't fix it, but you know what? You've done the right thing. You led us to where those bodies were. You didn't have to do that. You could have told us to screw off, and you could have just left us wondering where those kids were. Somebody might have found them one day, and they might not have.
That's not right. I can't do that. I wanted to, but I said I'm not going to do that.
At the end of the day, I think you love those kids. You did what you did because you felt like it was what you had to do at the time. Yeah, the times the autopsy going to show that anything happened to him, is it going to show that he was strangled?
I think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
But you're not sure?
So I was, like I said,
It sounds like you were just very angry at him. I mean, at this point, it doesn't change anything, but let's talk about this. This is probably going to be the best, most honest conversation we're going to get to have about all this. Because anything you say at this point does not change anything that's come up.
It doesn't change what?
It doesn't change anything that's come up before now.
What do you mean?
Like, it doesn't, if you suddenly come up with more details, you add things, or
most of my mind went blank, if you will, because I was just operating on a non-standard way. I've never done this.
Do you think you may have actually taken your son's life and he didn't just die from doing the PT? Because that strikes me.
I don't think so, and here's why. I don't understand there's something about the electricity that doesn't make sense, because what I did to him isn't out of the ordinary with the other kids. We all exercise like that. I don't get it.
But you didn't lose your cool with him because he wasn't telling you.
I got upset, but I wasn't a point where I didn't grab him and beat him to kill him, if that's what you're asking. No. So when this happened, I was panicking, like, what happened? And like I said, I started listening to wrong voices.
What did the voices tell you? You talk about the voices.
Oh, you're gonna die now, motherfucker. You better get the kids and you better get out of here. You better go now.
And when you say get the kids and get out of here, what do you think that meant? You think that meant for you to kill the children?
That means you better get rid of them and go.
Get rid of the children.
That's pretty much what that voice told me. Okay, then there's another voice that says, hey, go burn the bodies. There's a voice that says, why don't you just cut them up and feed them to a hog? There's another voice that says, why don't you just throw them into a concrete compressor? Yeah, I got all these thoughts. I said, what you see is just a little. I had all this shit cranking into my head. It's like, where does this come from? I don't like those thoughts coming out of my head. They scare me, man. Makes sense.
I would be concerned too.
That's what I'm saying. That's not normal shit. So how does this work? When am I going to have a press release about this?
I don't know, but with this many agencies involved, it could be very soon. I don't know what will be in the press release if they make one.
Can you contact them mugshots, that paper they have with the mugshots from South Carolina? Make sure they don't put me in that.
I don't know if they would do something. I think they tend to worry more about little stuff. I don't know if they get them on the big
I
charges.
hope not.
The problem you run into though is this is all this information is public information at this point. The public's not privy to the details of this investigation, but they are privy to the fact that you've been arrested, what you've been arrested for, or what you will be arrested for. Because Lexington County is not charged you with anything yet. I have not charged you with anything yet. When you do get charged, it is either going to be my name for the warrants or it's going to be one of my fellow detectives.
Is it going to be homicide?
That would be my best guess. This is all kind of new to me, like we talked about. I haven't done one of these investigations before. So I'm going to have to sit down, go through the code of law books, talk to my supervisors. I'm going to have to work out what's more appropriate. Unless one of the other detectives gets warrants while I'm gone. They may wait until I get back tomorrow and let me take care of that. Preferably, I like to do my own paperwork. It's very detail-oriented. I like to have control of it. That way, if there's a mistake in it or a technicality, I can't hold anybody accountable but myself. So that would be my preference, but if that's what they're going to do or not, I don't know. My problem is I call them while we're back there and they're throwing 1,000 questions at me about other things and saying, hey, you do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. So, and also they wanted me to write back with you. Obviously, I can't be in 4 places at once. So, but I think it's most important for us to come back together. So we came up here together. And I told you when we found the bodies, I wanted you to turn around and be a jerk to you, didn't I? And that hadn't changed. I kept my word at every point, just like you have, right?
Which jail am I going to tonight?
I would assume Tim's going back to Simpson tonight, correct? Yes. Yeah, by the time if you guys just want to drop me off in Smith County. Yeah. If you guys can wait, take Tim back, whenever we drop me off, I don't have a problem with that.
Drop you off and I sit and have one.
Yeah, we'll let you have a cigarette before they take you back.
Thank you.
I don't have an issue with that. Assuming we can track down somebody that smokes.
What?
Assuming we can track down somebody that smokes. Tim, is there anything else you'd like to talk about? No?
This time, no.
It's like I told you before. When you get to Lexington, it doesn't really matter if, it's going to be just a matter of when. When you get to Lexington, you're in Lexington County Detention Center. 2 hours for no reason.
Right.
It appeared on there that you kind of continually asked him about the mutilating of the bodies, correct?
Correct.
And he was always consistent that he tried to cut Natan's leg and he just couldn't go through with it, and that's what
Your
he.
Honor, I object. This comes to me first off.
I'm gonna have a question. I agree,
Sure.
be brief with it.
He maintained that he had tried to cut Natan's leg, but that was it.
And he told you that he had driven him around because he just wasn't ready to say goodbye at that point in time.
He did say that.
And then I believe at some point in time, y'all had an unrecorded conversation, I guess, after that.
Yes, because we were in the car a couple of hours, and occasionally there'd be bursts of conversation, and clearly I can't stop every time. We're going to have these quick interactions to start the recorder and stop the recorder, so I just tried to document some of that seemed important as we went.
I'm going to go to page, I guess, 146 of your report, most of the way down. And it appears he said to you, you know, the thought that there are people in this world that can take another human life and not feel any remorse about it scares me. Those kinds of people scare me. And he said that to you?
He did. He followed this by asking me directly if those kind of people scared me as well.
And you had also asked him about if there were any other contributing factors, correct?
I did. I asked him if this had anything to do with the DSS investigations or his ex-wife potentially taking him to family court.
And I think you had documented in your report that Timothy gave me what appeared to be a surprised look at this suggestion and responded no, as if those thoughts were not even a remote concern.
The way he reacted to me was that those were not on his mind talking about all this.
And you didn't end up traveling back with him from Mississippi to Lexington, correct?
I did not.
Did you come back with Creech and Lawrence, Mackey and Lawrence?
I had to overnight in Mississippi and had to get a local MBI agent to drive me halfway because they ended up in Alabama, and it was a logistical nightmare, but we ended up meeting up and driving back the next day.
And then at some point in time, you end up seeing Tim again, correct?
I do.
And I think that was at the detention center in Lexington when he got there.
It was.
And he asked you about the autopsies, correct?
Let me just get my dates right so that, yes.
Okay, can you tell me what date that was?
Yes, that would have been September 11th, 2014, the same day of the autopsies and the same day his extradition was completed to Lexington County.
And you told him that Elaine, Gabriel, Elias, and Mira's autopsy showed signs consistent with strangulation, correct?
Correct. That was the preliminary assessment.
And he asked you about the cause of Natan's death, didn't he?
He did.
And you told him that the cause of death was ruled as an unknown homicide.
I did, and that's what it was ruled as at the time.
And then he shrugged his shoulders and told you, I think you have, quote, "See, I told you so. I don't know how he died," end quote.
Correct.
And he was emotional while he was telling you that, wasn't he?
He was.
And you tried to reassure him that he did the right thing, didn't you?
I did, and he had a pretty visceral response to this and said, quote, "What do you mean I did the right thing? I killed my fucking kids," end quote.
And you clarified that and told him, hey, I was talking about your cooperation and helping us to find the body so that they can be put to rest, correct?
Correct.
And to this day, you still believe that his confessing and taking law enforcement to the children was the right thing to do?
I think it was. It was important for us to bring those children home.
That's all the questions I have.
All right, we'll take a quick break. step in the jury room, come back in about 10 minutes, and we'll try to get done for the day. We'll talk about the case.